Yeah, see where the trees open up and you can see their long things. See those dots?
Until we don't check data.
No, we have AT&T.
Oh, we have AT&T Verizon, so we used to have.
We got 3 out of 5 bars.
That's good. You know, I know I forgot the last call. I only know one person that's Lind and pruned in 91, that's trees. They thin the trees just like thinning carrots.
Is something like Google Maps supposed to work like on an airplane with Wi-Fi?
I think so.
You should be able to show your location too, don't you think? With the GPS, that should still work.
Yeah. Viewpoint.
I couldn't get mine to work.
Look straight ahead. I know there's a mountain there somewhere. My plan, in case anybody's wondering, is to stop everywhere.
So this might be.
Everything that's green out there is new.
Yeah.
Everything that's brown isn't.
Brownish, grayish, yuckish.
You know, they said if it's overcast, it'll be a lousy day to do
The Great Salt Lake in Utah, and there's an island called Antelope Island, and you drive across the causeway. Yeah. You drive across the causeway, and it was nice camping. Oh, it was pristine. It was so quiet. You could hear the birds flapping their wings when they flew over you.
Planted in 1983 to be harvested in 2028. So it's another 17 years of growing for those critters over there.
No, I don't think you read that right, did you? Because these don't look... Well, when did the volcano pop?
80. It's like just where the trees were dropped 30 years ago. When you look up on the hills and say, is that logged or the stumps from trees that were carried down?
I don't think they were lobbed like that.
Usually in Rome, you'd see a part of a marble column that had just been dropped somewhere.
Yeah.
So there's just parts of trees.
Yeah, we're sitting across the parking lot from the Coliseum, and what are we sitting on? A beautiful column that had been knocked down and been sitting there for how many hundreds of years?
Look up to your left.
Oh, waterfall on the left.
Oh, yeah. Is that water? Is that ice? No, that's water coming down.
Lift.
Love the empty forest. Anybody want to take a picture of clouds?
Well, there's like a mountain over there.
Oh, all right. Well, it's not very long.
Yeah, I tend to stop for mountains.
We have a little more time.
And you can tell it's windy.
Bring my netbook out tonight and show you the pictures from Crater Lake.
Okay.
The snow drifts are about double the height of the car.
Well, they get 40 feet of snow a year. There.
You can park
Here?
it any place.
Are you sure?
Try to bear with me today as I've got some props to help us along. I've got a prop here, the valley, and the mountain right above it there to give you an idea of the landscape features you would be looking at today if you could see anything. Also, I have a mural back here behind me from 2008, and this is what you would be seeing into the crater if it was a clear day. So, got those to help us along with what I'm going to be talking about, which is not just necessarily the 1980 eruption, but these mysterious landforms and also these down trees that we're seeing everywhere. And those mysterious landforms, where they all came from. So I'm going to be asking some questions along the way. And if you were actually here, say maybe 10, even 5 years ago, you would have seen a lot more of these down trees in the area. You're seeing a lot less of them now. That question too is going to be answered and picked up as we go. But to start things off, I've got two incredible pictures here for you. Who would believe me if I said this was the exact same mountain you were looking at? It's actually kind of hard to believe. But there it is. And Mount St. Helens, before the eruption, with its original glacier on top there, was and still is a stratovolcano. And by stratovolcano I mean that it had these very steep sides to it. And being such a steep-sided volcano, having that very perfect conical shape to it, it's prone to some problems. It can weaken itself over time, therefore causing landslides later on. So with volcanoes like Mount St. Helens, something's got to give at some point. That's always the issue. Now, for us, our story begins about March 20th of 1980. And at this point, there are a series of earthquakes registering about 4.1 on the Richter scale. There are thousands, tens of thousands of seismic disturbances happening here. And it seems to be that after 123 years of dormant activity, Mount St. Helens might just be awakening again, because a lot of these earthquake, these seismic disturbances are very close up underneath the mountain, as opposed to being at a great distance. You get to March 27th, however, and all of a sudden goes from all these seismic disturbances to one loud explosion that's heard about noon that day. And that one explosion blows off the top of Mount St. Helens, leaving a big gaping mile-wide crater. And this picture, which is taken from the Timberline parking lot, which would have been right below the volcano at the time, you can see right where my finger is, they've had a view looking up to see that there not only was a mile-wide crater, but steam was starting to pour out. And there were several of these steam-powered explosions Now, these steam-powered explosions were constant. Starting in March, there was probably one steam-powered explosion every hour. When it gets to about the middle of April, this goes down to about once every day. Now, what do you see mainly on this mountain above all else? Snow. And where there's snow, there's got to be what? Water. Tons of groundwater in that mountain at the time. So, because of all of that groundwater, there are a lot of these steam-powered eruptions, and steam is being let off. So people were convinced, well, a mountain that's constantly erupting can't possibly yield a huge eruption. So, got to be in the clear, right? Beginning of May rolls around, though, and all of a sudden these eruptions just stop. Everything gets really, really quiet. No seismic activity whatsoever, just gets really quiet. Why does it get quiet? What's it missing? What's it lacking now? It had a lot of it before. It's missing what?
An outlet.
Water. It's a little to no water in the mountain at this point, beginning of May. In fact, all that you have really left are magmatic gases, pressure that is building up inside of the mountain. Now, for someone who's really experienced with volcanic gases, this would be the man right here. David Johnston, as you know, this building and ridge named after him, was a gas man. And by I mean a gas man, his specialty was in volcanic gases, not that he was a particularly gassy person. And went up a few times into the volcano to take samples of volcanic gases. One of those being a gas called sulfur dioxide. And sulfur dioxide just slowly, every now and then, seeping out of the vent. It was very inconsistent, though. It wasn't doing it continuously. It was just every now and then. So he was kind of frustrated that he wasn't getting these very consistent results. So it turns out that gas readings weren't really the best way to tell if Mount St. Helens was actually in for a big eruption. But there was a sure sign right in front of everyone's noses. Deformation on a grand scale. This is the bulge. And the bulge, and they started measuring it out those first few days in March, and it was about 5.5 to 6 feet per day, the first measurement they got. And that didn't make a lot of sense to them at first. It was really hard to understand that this mountain was growing. It was inflating and deflating over and over again. Now that didn't make a lot of sense. It also didn't make a lot of sense that the mountain that everybody had known to love was actually a volcano. So in about 3 weeks' time, after that first period in March, just 3 weeks later, this bulge is now 85 feet coming out of the mountain. And you get to the day before the eruption, May 17th, the bulge is 300 feet coming off the side of the mountain. In fact, in that 3-week period, 85 feet could fill this entire space, right from here all the way to the end of the observatory there. Of course, the day before the eruption, May 17th, you're looking at a bulge 300 feet coming out and 450 feet going up the side of the mountain. So, once again, something's got to give. And what's going on inside of that mountain? What's making it bulge like that? Well, we perceive volcanoes to erupt to the top, right? Generally, yeah. And we have magma starting below here in the magma chamber from the lower mantle. It makes its way up the conduit there, and then it would erupt through the top. In this case, though, what actually happens is, as magma is making its way through the conduit there, it gets stuck on its way up. It finds its way into some blockage. It can't go up. There's really only one way for it to go, and that's a weak spot in the volcano that's been forming on the north flank, the flank that's facing us. And what's happened there is what happens to a lot of these stratovolcanoes. You get rotten rock. And it's what happens when water mixes together with sulfur dioxide. It becomes acidic water that turns the inside of the mountain, making it the consistency of clay. So magma literally injecting itself into the mountain at this point and pushing its way out, creating this bulge that's growing 5.5 to 6 feet per day. So it really is only a matter of time. As David Johnston put it, it was like a powder keg and nobody knew how long the fuse was. May 18th, 1980, at about 8:32 in the morning, Mount St. Helens starts off with a landslide, the largest recorded landslide in history. Now, these series of photos that I'm showing you here are taken by a man named Gary Rosenquist. And he was in a campsite called Bear Meadow, about 11 miles from the volcano. Would have been out to the east. And he just gets up one morning to take some pictures of the volcano. And 8:27 in the morning there is when he starts taking those. And just a few minutes later, he becomes uniquely poised to take pictures of the volcano as it's erupting. He didn't know he was going to get this, but he did. These pictures that you're looking at are taken over an entire 20-second span. Now let's take a closer look at this landslide. Do you think this landslide came down in one entire section, or did it come in separate sections? They're separate. In fact, it did come down in separate sections, in slide blocks as they're called. Slide block 1 is right down there in the bottom, heading towards the valley. The one right above it, of course, slide block 3. Slide block 3 is just about to come down. Take a look at the next picture, and slide block 3 has already sunken into the summit of the volcano. And you can see the beginnings of that inky sideways blast. That blast propels sideways once that chunk dives into the mountain. We're going to talk a little bit later about that sideways blast, focusing a little bit more closely on this landslide. Got my handy dandy picture here for us. Now take a look very closely. Do you see a lot of these humps that are in the earth where my finger is? And you would see a lot of these scattered all across the valley. These huge earth mounds that are sticking up out of the ground. Where do you think those would have come from?
Gaseous bulges.
Would have come straight directly from the mountain, wouldn't it? And these are called hummocks. And it's basically just a scientific word for big giant chunks of Mount St. Helens. That's what they were. They're all over the place. And did all of that landslide material, did it come down going in one direction, or did it go in several directions? It went in several directions. You can actually see down here, there's a piece of it that makes its way directly for the ridgeline. Johnston Ridge, which we're sitting on right now, it was coming directly for it at about 180 miles per hour. It's like a roller coaster ramping up the side of the ridge here, having nowhere else to go, and it ramps back down, heading into the Toutle River Valley down here. There's another landslide material piece of it that makes its way directly for Spirit Lake, which is out here to the east. Now, once again, on a clear day, you would would see Spirit Lake to your east pretty visibly. It would be all the way back there beyond that ridge. And Spirit Lake, the reason why you can see it is why? Because 31 years ago, if you were standing on this ridge, you would have not been able to see it. So why would you be able to see it now? Got some Spirit Lake props here. This is Spirit Lake before the eruption. And Spirit Lake is about 175 feet deep. It was back behind the ridge before the eruption. And what happens is that the landslide material, much like if I had a huge bathtub filled with water right here, and I took this big old hunk of rock and I tossed it in the bathtub, where's all the water going to go? It's going to go up, going out. It's displaced, that water is. And the same thing happens as soon as that landslide material hits the water. It goes directly in, and the water shoots up into the air about 800 feet. And it goes up the ridge lines, taking down trees with it, all sorts, and then it comes back down and it actually shifts away from the ridge about 4.5 miles until after the eruption. The lake is definitely still there. It's just a lot bigger. It's also much shallower. It's about 110 feet deep as opposed to that 175 feet deep. 4.5 miles more across than it used to be. This is the new Spirit Lake, folks. And this is Mount Shasta in Northern California. What do you see in the valley there? What are those? Those dark humps of earth there are definitely hummocks. And many scientists in the beginning, before Mount St. Helens erupted, thought those were something along the lines of tiny volcanoes. They had no idea that that actually would have come from an eruption of Mount Shasta. And it did, 30,000 years prior to 1980. Mount Shasta erupted and left behind its evidence. Now let's get back to that blast. Take a look at this picture. This is Mount Bandai-san in Japan. Now what defining feature is similar in this picture to the one behind me? Yeah, that familiar horseshoe crater. A blast would have come directly sideways. The thing of it is, though, what kinds of things would be in this blast to make trees do things like this? Have trees on their sides, and also trees that had their tops completely torn off, leaving behind shattered stumps, like this one over here to my left, and that big fella back behind you. So I heard wind. Anything else? Lots of heat. Rocks. Oh yeah. You really can't go wrong with that, because there were all kinds of things coming from this particular blast. You have 680 degree Fahrenheit in terms of heat, so pretty extreme heat. You have what's called a stone wind, which means that magmatic pressure goes off like a powder keg. Much like if I take this soda can here and I shake it for a long period of time, you know exactly what's going to happen when I lift that tab, and you people are already backing away, and you're not going to be very happy with me when I lift that tab. And definitely the same principle applies there. That sideways blast released in a tremendous amount of pressure. And along with that pressure in that heat, you also have rock fragments. And rock fragments went from this size to house size. They got to be pretty big, and they were closely clumped together as well. In fact, if I took this 1 meter square PVC pipe just like this, and I stuck it in front of me like so, I would literally have 60 tons of rock per second for a full minute fitting through this tiny little square at a top speed of around 300 miles per hour or more. 60 tons of rock per second for a full minute through this tiny little square. That's how closely clumped together those rock fragments were. And this blast reaches out 15 to 17 miles to the north, or in this direction towards Rainier, and it covers 230 square miles of forest land. If you've ever been to Chicago, it's about that size. 230 square miles of forest land. And what was once down here used to be an old canopy forest. You can kind of see the fog clearing up here. A 200-year-old canopy forest, as far as the eye could see, looked a lot like this. 200 years for this to get here. About 3 minutes for it all to be taken away. 3 minutes. 230 square miles, 15 to 17 miles to the north of us in just 3 minutes. Amazing stuff. Now, another interesting thing. Oh, there goes the car. 15 to 17 miles was about how much the farthest traveled. And people who thought they were in relatively safe distance, maybe even 15 miles away. There was a car that was settled 15 miles on a ridge away from the mountain, thought they were in relatively safe proximity. A rock about this size went straight through the windshield. Now, the reason why I asked that question in the beginning, if anybody was here before, is because if you were here even just 5 years ago, things would look a lot different. There would have been a lot more downed trees around you out here and along the ridge lines. But say if you were here probably back in the 90s, things would look a lot different. Take a look at my timeline picture here. This picture up here, approximately 1981 when that would have been taken. This would have been about the mid-1990s, all the way up to about 2005. So you can see, over the course of the last few years, things have definitely become a lot greener. But where did all those downed trees go? Where are they going? Exactly. They're sinking. They're sinking into the ground as we speak. A natural decomposition rate that's pretty fast. Extreme heat and extreme cold breaks down the wood, and it is sinking into the ground as we speak. So, with that in mind, you have a remarkable change, and Mount St. Helens definitely opens our eyes to the amount of power in its eruptions and the power of change that it's creating around us every single day, each new year as it brings along. So I want to thank you guys for coming out and listening to my spiel. I know I wasn't always easy to get along with, but I hope you did enjoy and take something away from this, which is, as a famous Greek philosopher put it, nothing is permanent but change. So speaking of change, recently Coldwater Visitor Center was shut down due to lack of funding, but thanks to support from visitors like you who wear these funky looking wristbands on your wrists, we're able to keep this area open to future generations to come and enjoy this wonderful side of change. So thanks again. I'll be here to answer all of your questions, but thanks so much.
Actually, that little patch, it's going to go right over and we're going to see it. We're going to see it. So I think that's it. I think we're looking at it right now.
The stuff more down the mountain, it came over this ridge that we're seeing, rocks and stuff. It's all down the other side. So you wouldn't be. Sure.